Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining our Take 30. So today's Take 30 is on the Cognos audit extension. I refer to it as your secret weapon, and hopefully as we go through this, you'll understand why I think that. So for the agenda, first we're going to cover, well, what is the audit extension? Going to go through a high level on how to install and how to configure it. I'm going to give a quick demo of it, kind of walk you through the management interface, walk you through the metadata package that you get with it, and look at some of the reports. Talk about how one can refine the audit so that you don't have to audit everything every single time. You can be more fine-grained about it. And some other thoughts, right? Some other issues that may have caused trouble in the past, and just things to think about. And then I'll open it up for questions. And certainly, if you have questions as we go through, go right ahead, throw them into the question panel, and we'll answer them. All right, so as always, kind of a reminder of upcoming events. Let's see, next week we're going to talk about Snowflake, and then Thursday after that we're going to do a deep dive on some of the new features of 11.17 on the heels of the walkthrough that Rachel gave us a couple weeks back. And then the following week there'll be another Snowflake topic. All right, and as always, feel free to, if you want to talk to us one-on-one, more in depth about just about anything, go ahead onto our website and sign up for a 30-minute slot, and we're happy to have that conversation. Okay, so a little bit about me. So I'm Scott Masage. I'm the practice director for BI here at Ironside. Quickly coming up on my 8-year anniversary. I think it's a few days away here. So prior to joining Ironside, I worked internally at Cognos in finance and managed both our Cognos BI portal and a development team. And then after the acquisition, I did the same thing at IBM prior to joining Ironside. So, and it is that real world experience of managing a Cognos environment that has led to my kind of zealotry for the audit extension. So, what is the audit extension? First of all, were I to name it, give it a name, I wouldn't choose audit extension perhaps. It's really more of an inventory application, right? So, what it does is it's an SDK-based application that runs in an application server and extracts a lot of meaningful information from the content store, but puts it into relational tables in a database that are intuitively named and can be understood. So if any of you have kind of spelunked around in the content store, the table names within there aren't necessarily meant for humans, as you've probably discovered, and it's hard to find things in. Well, you shouldn't do that anyways. You should be using something like the audit extension to explore that content. So the audit extension is provided with a report package and 14 standard reports that cover a variety of different topic areas. It can be used against multiple environments. So one situation that we will work with is one where there's we're pointing at the dev instance and we're pointing at the prod instance, and we're inventorying or we're auditing both. We've done that, and I've done that in my past. So you'll find that it's a very useful tool for managing Cognos environments, and it's comparable to offerings from the Modio suite of tools. So I think it's most like Modio PI, not so much like CI. It was introduced in 2006, upgraded to support Cognos 10, and now it supports Cognos Analytics and has for a number of years now. You can access the management interface via a web UI, but you can also send web form calls to it and web services calls to it. So two stories that, for me highlight the value of the audit extension. And these really go back to the acquisition of Cognos by IBM and that year of transition. So the first example was you know, Cognos had a different fiscal year than IBM did, and there was a concern that people's reports were going to need to be modified or break, right? Reports that they had written. And what the audit extension actually does is, in addition to all the other things, it captures the report specifications. So you have the ability to query the report specification, the XML blobs, and understand, okay, which reports have this column in them, and who is the owner of the report, right? And using that, we were able to reach out to those users and alert them to this change and how to make that change. The other example was probably the most rewarding experience. So during that year of transition, we were informed that all of our applications needed to be certified. And as the application owner, it was really up to me, which, okay, that sounds great, certified. But what does that mean? At the time, it meant that I needed to identify everyone who was using my Cognos environment, identify any content they had created, engage their manager, and get them to agree that, yes, this person should have access to Cognos, and that, yes, they were allowed to create the reports they had created. As you can imagine, this was going to be a lot of work, right? So in this case, again, I turned to the audit extension. So literally in an afternoon, I was able to create a data set that detailed all this information, put it behind a security-driven web form, and send out a link to all the managers with a button that said, you know, certify this person or not. We recorded that and, you know, got the job done really quickly. So just one example. Okay, so in the audit extension, there are basically 3 audit types. There used to be 4. There was a system audit, but that has been deprecated. So the first is account, right? So the account audit captures user details, portal pages, created and modified dates, everything really you know, related to a user. There's a content audit that captures objects and object specifications, folders, reports, queries, search path, object permissions, created and modified dates, the XML specs, parameters for saved reports and reports views, details about report outputs. The last one is the role or capability audit. And this one is about the capabilities section of the Cognos admin interface, right? Which users have which capabilities? You know, are they granted? Are they denied? Which groups are they in? What's all of that, right? So we find this to be a useful tool in a situation where you know, there are groups, and people don't know exactly who has access to what. And this tool, instead of doing it manually, this tool allows you to do that rather quickly. So, in terms of preparing to install, there's a how-to guide. There's a version 10 and a version 11 out there. I will show the page, the web page for version 11. So it's a good read. This is also where you download the code, the package, and the reports, right? The deployment archive. You need to get a JDBC driver for the database that you're using. These 3 databases, SQL Server, Oracle, DB2, are supported. Our strong recommendation is to leverage the same audit. So wherever your audit database is, use that, right? Because you would have already had the appropriate credentials to make it work, and it's, you know, it's Cognos related activity, so it makes sense. Other things you need an account with admin rights in Cognos. You need to know the dispatcher URI, and again, you need a DB server account that can create objects, run queries, etc. DBO is ideal. Again, strong suggestion to use the Cognos audit database that you're already using. All right, so quick overview of the install and config. So the first thing you do is you unpack the downloaded content onto the server. Again, you know, we typically, our recommendation is to put this on the dev server, right? Install it on the dev server. Don't install it on the prod server. There is a bit of load that it generates. So just move that off to dev. You also need to restart Cognos services because it's using WebSphere Liberty as the app server, and restarting prod is not an insignificant event, whereas dev not so much. So unpack the downloaded content, install the JDBC driver, build and deploy the WAR file, restart Cognos services, go into the web interface for the audit extension and configure it appropriately. So point to the database and then point to the Cognos instance. You're more than likely going to need to refine the properties file. We'll talk about that a little bit later. Then you're going to run an audit, and then you can create the data. So then you want to be able to report against it, right? So we've already connected to the database. You run the audit, so that data is now in that database. But now you want to create a data source. You can, again, if you're using an audit, if you have the audit package installed and the audit data source connected and set up, you can just leverage that, and that's how you consume the reports that come with the audit extension, or you can create your own. Okay. All right. So in terms of the initial database configuration, this is that screen that pops up first. So you need to select your database type, give it credentials, the port number, which database it is, and then save this. And once you do this, it's going to it's going to connect to the database and start creating, it's going to deploy the schema, right? Create the tables and the fields in them and all of that, right? And it's this action that does that. All right, so I'm going to give a quick demo. So we'll cover the management interface. We'll look at the package, kind of do a tour of the package, and look at a couple of the reports. We won't look at all 14, of course, just a couple. All right, so let me share a different screen. One moment. Okay, so the first thing I want to show you, hopefully everyone can see this. This is that link that details out the audit extension. So this gives you all the information in great detail. This is also where you download, you would download the audit extension and the package, the deployment archive that has the package of the reports in it. Okay, so this is the management interface. So what we see here are, you can password protect this. I have, if I move around here, it might time out on me, but let's see. Right now I've got two Cognos instances set up. They're actually pointing at the same server, but just for demonstration purposes. So what you want to do is go into here, right? This is the edit server. Let's see if it hits me with a timeout. Yep, 1 second. All right, so let us go back to edit server. Okay, so for this server instance, I'm supplying the URL to the dispatcher. In this case, the only version is Cognos Analytics. In the version 10, there was a difference between 10.1 and 10.2. You can give a description, which is going to show up on the previous pane. You can filter, right? So again, if you don't want to audit the entire contents, you can refine this down either in the content audit or the account audit. And then down here, you're selecting, okay, which audits do I want to perform, okay? The role, which gives us capabilities, content, which tells us all about the content, and account, which tells us all about users and groups and roles. You need to supply a login, right? So if this user has admin credentials, it needs to have that. If I make any changes here, I have to click on update to save it, and then I hit return to take me back, right? So once I've got this, I would hit this execute audit on server button and the audit would run, right? So this one takes more time than I want to have you experience. It's probably 45 seconds, given that I've scoped it down. Okay, so it's that easy, right? So let's go to the package. Okay, so this is the package that gets created, that's automatically provided to you. You've got a database view, which these are all the tables, but it's also got a kind of a presentation layer here as well. So what are we seeing here, right? We're seeing, again, this is sort of deprecated, this piece here, so don't worry about that. But we've got information about the namespaces that have been exposed. This is all the audit activity, right? So every time you audit, it's going to increment the audit ID by 1, capture the start date and time, end date and time, the status, how long it took, was it a content audit, was it an account audit, all of that information is captured, right? So basically every time you audit, it's just adding more rows to that database, okay? There are audit filters, and did I use any audit filters when I ran my audit? It would be captured here. This is just a history of the different audit types. This is like a date dimension for audit. Then we get into the details around each of the individual audits. So role audit, okay? Users by capabilities, users by roles and groups, user hierarchy by capabilities, namespace users. So let's look at the first one, right? So what's being captured here? The audit ID, the capability of the user type, depth in the hierarchy, things of that nature. Same here, just all these details, okay? If we look at account audit, so this, this provides a tremendous amount of information about users, email address. Some of this information is coming from your authentication source, but is the account disabled? When it was created? When was it modified? Like details like this, like how many rows per page in the in the interface that we want to show? Are they using what skin are they applying? Is it the corporate skin or the business skin, right? Or the modern one? Are they showing the welcome page? So all that information is captured. Any portal page that they have, it's there. Content audit, I think, is the place I typically go. So this is all about the different items in the content store. So what's the name of it? Where is it stored? How deep is it? Who's the owner? Is it hidden? When was it created? When was it modified? What's the package, if there is one? Item specifications, right? This is the XML, okay? On and on and on, right? So output versions, right? Output versions, there's a report for that I'm going to show. That's a key one, right? Because if you want to know who's got, who's taking up all the space in your content store, this is where you go, okay? Also, the last thing I'll show you here is filters. So literally, I can make a report, pull in the columns I want, and then I can drop this metadata filter called, last successful audit right on top, and then it'll only show me the last successful audit. Okay, pretty good feature there. Okay, so let's look at a couple of these reports. So content saved output size. Again, I think this is a nice report to have. So literally, what I'm seeing here is what's the item, where is it located, how many outputs are there, and what's the total size. Okay, so with this report, you can quickly understand who's taking up the most space, right? Or what do we need to go deal with? Okay, user account details, right? So if we look at this example, so Bob O'Donnell, who works on the team, when was his account created? When was it modified? What skin is he using? Does he have portal pages? And if so, what are they? What's his locale? Okay, all this information is nice to have, and these just are out of the box reports. All right, and the last one I want to show is capabilities users hierarchy. So what this is showing is the capabilities, the sub feature, who has it been granted to, which role has it been granted to, and which users has it been granted to, right? So in this case, The thing called administrative tasks, which sits underneath administration, or that capability, sub-capability really. All of these default roles have been granted that sub-capability. But also, this individual user has been granted that capability. Okay, so it's who can do this? Well, it's a combination of groups and then individual users in this case. Okay, so in collaboration administration, right? So if you look here, we've got a group here, and these are the members of the groups, right? And you notice that these are hyperlinks. So if I want to find out more about one of these users, I simply click on that. It takes me to the detail, right? So that is, let me just pause here. Okay, so that is a quick tour of what's available. But again, that's 3 of 14 reports, and you can make your own. All right, so I need to change my sharing. Okay. All right, continuing on. So as I said, one of the things you often need to do when you're first leveraging the audit extension is to refine the properties file. Okay, so this is where the properties file lives. It's C11 or C10 AuditExtension.properties. A couple of the ones that we're always looking at and always changing. The first is flat search, right? So there's a property called options.aa.flatSearch. So when you set that to true, it only audits those user accounts who have logged into the environment. Okay. By default, that is false. So if you think about, and I had this experience once. So right, so we got acquired by IBM. I installed the audit extension on an IBM Cognos server and did not set this to true. And after about 24 hours, I decided just to kill it off, right? Because what it was doing was going and looking through the entire authentication source. And certainly IBM has a lot of employees, right? A lot of accounts and objects inside of their authentication source. Object limits, right? So for each of the audit types, there's a maximum items count. If you set it to 0, it's infinite. So consider that, because what you might wind up having, you might wind up in a situation where you run it, it fails, you look at the log and it said, we hit the max, right? I think the max is 1,000 items. So if you know that you have more than 1,000 objects in your content store, and you very likely do, you probably want to set that to 0. Audit duration limit, same idea, right? There's a default, I forget what the default is off the top of my head, but you probably want to set that to 0 or set it to be a couple of hours, right? Depends on your environment. Report specs. So this option C includes specifications equals true. That's turned on by default, and it's going to capture the XML report specs. You may or may not want that. That's how you control it. Okay. Changes require a restart of the Cognos services, and again, this is why we are suggesting that you run it in dev. Okay. Other thoughts. Again, you can turn on security for the audit console. As you saw, we have it turned on. It can be resource intensive. I've never seen it. I've never seen it impact an environment, but just understand that it is doing work. So avoid that totally. Just run on the dev server. Consider the use of filters for the content and account audits. It uses regular expressions, and if you go into that page on Developer Works, it goes into detail about that. Understand that the audit extension is not officially supported, but the folks at IBM are from Cognos, right? Or the IBMers who have adopted it are typically active on the Developer Works forums if you have questions. Know that my folders are audited by default, and always always consider firewalls. We have run into situations where teams are trying to run it on the dev server, but the dev server can't talk to the prod server, so it can't audit it. think about that. That might be a concern for you. You know, if it fails, you know, if you run the audit and it fails, this is where the logs live, right? So you can understand what's going on. Okay, so you can run it. What this means, this second bullet means, is that you can run it from Event Studio, right? So we usually run it interactively, but you can run it from Event Studio if you want. I think that was more useful when there was a server audit, so you could check to see that the server was up, or know all your dispatchers were up. But again, that given that that's been deprecated, I'm not sure how valuable that is. You know, typical use cases for this tool, you know, figuring out which users have which capabilities, figuring out how many users have each capability. Reports changed since last audit, right? That's kind of important. It's like, okay, what has been changing in the environment? How much change activity is there? Did we expect it? Saved output size we covered. Looking at the report specifications can be interesting. You know, you have an opportunity to use this to improve the performance of your environment, right? So you can find those reports that are using perhaps, you know, limited local processing, or you know, hard-coded SQL or unions or whatever, right? It's in the spec. It is captured with the audit extension. You can find it. And last thing, of course, it comes with a free model, so you can build your own reports. Okay, so with that, I will go to the Q&A section. So let me take a look and see what we have for questions. Okay, looks like we've got a couple. Debbie, do you want to run through those?
Yeah, if you don't mind, that'd be great. And thank you very much. I know we're running up against the end of time, but let's see if we can get through a couple of these, because it seems to be a really popular topic. What happens to audit extensions when you upgrade Cognos?
All right, so that's a good question. So the Cognos installer will remove any user-added files from the file system during an upgrade. So to avoid this, you can leverage something known as the preserve.txt file. So I think that's a relatively new thing. I think it's an 11 thing. So it's a file that lives in the config directory, and you can add in the audit extension files and directories, and it will, as you do the install, it will avoid those files, right? Same is true for any customizations.
Thanks, Scott. And sure. Another one, does audit extension capture new content like dashboard and data modules?
Right, okay, so yeah, so of the new objects that you can create as of 11, you know, as of the release of 11, yes, it captures those. They have interesting dashboards show up as explorations, which is interesting, but you can identify them.
Thanks. And another one, this might be related to the last one, but will the Cognos 11 audit extensions audit version 10 instances?
So unfortunately not, right? So there's a version 10 and there's a version 11 of the audit extension, and so if you need to check out a 10 version, you need if you need to audit version 10 of Cognos, you need the version 10 of the audit extension. One thing to note, when you do the upgrade, if you do upgrade the audit extension from 10 to 11, it's recommended by IBM that you create a new database so as not to impact the old one. Any further questions?
Nope, I think that runs through them. Thanks a lot.
All right, great. So thanks all for joining. Again, if you have additional questions about the audit extension, feel free to reach out via the one-to-one mechanism, and we'd be happy to talk. Thank you very much.